out this week than I can even fit onto this radio station because we can only be talking about one thing at a time around here. And there was a big golf tournament over the weekend. We obviously have the Ravens on the backfield out in Owings Mills. Meanwhile, the Orioles are clawing around first place, welcoming the first place Texas Rangers in after a less than illustrious stretch throughout July in hitting the baseball. And they made a move late into the evening on Sunday dealing for Wade Miley. This guy is a bit of a Mariner enthusiast. He is out in Portland, Oregon. He always comes on talking about the business of baseball, but he certainly had some things to say on Twitter on Sunday night after the Orioles dealt a minor leaguer for Wade Miley. He is Maury Brown. He is Bizball Maury out on Twitter as well as at Forbes, and he's one of our defending champions and rock and rollers, and it's always great to have Maury on the program. Hey, man, what's going on? Orioles and the Mariners involved in a little pre-trading deadline dealing here. I think people here are lukewarm on it one way or another, but he's certainly not a bad pitcher. He's certainly a major league pitcher, right?
Yeah, and I think I would look at it that way, Nestor. There's just not a heck of a lot, with maybe Chris Archer the possible exception. There's just not a heck of a lot of top-tier pitchers available this time around. And I guess, that they were probably, that Baltimore certainly looking at him as somebody that could maybe fill some extra innings maybe in the middle. I have no idea how he plans to use him, how Buck Walter plans to use him. But he's been around for a while. He looked like he was down for a little bit. The change in moving to Seattle, the idea, of course, was moving zip codes might help a little bit. But I think the Mariners are in this situation to where they're trying to look possibly to the future a little bit now. They've got a bit of a crawl. More than a crawl. They've got a serious climb at this point to go ahead and get into the wild card. And I think that Jerry Dipoto was trying to look at it that way. Conversely, though, obviously Baltimore is right there, as you mentioned, and they're right there in first place. So pitchers, you can never have enough arms, and especially in the postseason. You never know how people or how pitchers are going to be as they go down the stretch. And so flexibility and having some ability to do something. They really didn't give up a heck of a lot. You basically had a Cuban prospect given up for this. So I think that it actually is very lopsided in favor of the Orioles. Is it a major move for them? No. But given what they gave away in terms of what they're getting, I think that the Orioles did quite well in the deal.
Well, you get a guy who's on his fourth team in 4 years, and, he's been chased away after being signed to, a really healthy contract, and the Orioles are obviously taking on a part of that. And, for the Mariners, they've at least now shed a bunch of payroll for next year and shed that option that was available for him for 18, but they shed $9 million for next year to say, well, we'll do something else with that $9 million. The Orioles bought Mark Trumbo this year for $9 million, another guy Seattle didn't want last year, but also, allowed Wei-Yin Chen to disappear over money, gave Miguel Gonzalez away over $5 million. They didn't want to guarantee him. But for the Mariners, I guess they said, well, that's $9 million back in. We'll go start somebody else 33 games next year instead of Wade Miley.
Yeah, and there was certainly that. And look, if you look at historically how the Orioles have done, and I go back to Adam Jones and the trades that they've made with Baltimore. Baltimore has done really well. Trumbo is another example of a guy that just did not fit in well there, and after doing, he was doing great in with the Angels, moved him to the Diamondbacks. You get him back to, comes around to the Mariners. They move him out to Baltimore, and then look, he found a bit of his power back. So that is always kind of the thing that seems to happen between the Mariners and Baltimore. Not always, but certainly. This is one of those instances, but yeah, look, if you look at the salary, yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing though that I find kind of odd right now is that, well, yes, it's always good to, if you've got salary that you aren't having effectiveness out of, to move that off the books. The Mariners now, where they have really had ownership, really now is all local, and that's a significant thing. They've really said that now that they're really going to open things up, and that that money is not going to be an issue. But I think it was down to this.
Well, with Cano, it felt that way, right? It hasn't felt at all like they're not serious about winning there. They've made tons of different moves, including Dipoto himself, right?
Yeah, and they have. They really have. I think that they've had they've had some bad general managers. That's the only way that I can really say. Since really, I mean, it's just been bad since 2001, ostensibly. It's just been bad. And so the money's not there. I think that I would go back to this. I think that Wade Miley is at $9 million is not money well spent. I mean, spending money isn't the issue. It's spending it efficiently and effectively, and they just weren't getting that out of him.
Maury Brown covers all things sports and the business of sports for Bizball, as well as at Forbes and other places. You can certainly follow him at BizballMaury out on Twitter. And, hey, man, I invited you on to the show before there was even, this sort of Seattle-Baltimore thing going on. But the trade deadline is interesting for everyone. And, as much as we always sort of wait the last half an hour before the trading deadline, I don't get the vibe this year that there's not much left at the bottom of the bottle at this point for a tradable talent, and I'm sure some things will happen at the 11th of the 11th hour. But by and large, the last couple of weeks have been a series of teams finding their way, whether it was the Indians, the Nationals, the Red Sox, the Rangers, all making moves, the Cubs as well, all making moves far in advance of the actual deadline.
Yeah, and that's true, Nestor. I mean, it really has been a bit of a change. Last year there was obviously some big moves that had direct impacts into the World Series championship. Namely, Johnny Cueto was probably the biggest piece out there that happened, but Cespedes was the other one, that had paid real dividends. But I would really watch. I mean, Jay Bruce still hangs out there. There's suddenly now the Yankees have let it known that maybe in the first time in forever they're going to be real sellers. And suddenly there's been this strange thing going on where it looks like the Red Sox may have interest in Beltran, which I find kind of an interesting thing. He's clearly a veteran at this point. But, you're starting to get guys that are looking for really, rentals at this point, I would think.
Well, you'll also have guys that do clear waivers after the first two. So, that there are more deals that always seem to get made in August, right?
Well, and they do, and that's the thing. I mean, a trade deadline is really, really not a fair thing to say. I mean, there are trades that go on, and there is still movement after the trade deadline. But it's always a talking point to see what happens and to see who moves. But I mean, the Chapman move was probably kind of, I think, the biggest one. And then once again, everybody's focusing around pitchers. The Dodgers certainly need somebody really badly, in their rotation right now. And they always seem to be somebody that has the money, although I don't know how much longer they can continue to burn it. And I brought this up earlier. I think that Chris Archer becomes a very valuable piece. The other guy that I don't think the Mariners would move, but I begin to wonder about, is just how much longer are you going to ride Felix Hernandez? You could get something out of him. You could get considerable prospects and others out of him now before he starts to basically drop off. And this is the first year that he's been a little bit dinged up. Now, I don't know whether that's looking at the future of him, but I think that he's a key piece for the Mariners coming back to them.
Well, it is crazy. I mean, I saw him pitch Sunday night. I mean, he's been in the big leagues almost a dozen years and hasn't pitched in a playoff game yet, right? It's almost a shame, really.
It is a shame. And, the thing about it is that he's been a true workhorse. I mean, when you look around, I think they showed something. I think it was like, hasn't thrown as much as young as he is since like Blyleven. And so he's really durable, or has been, and there's been a little bit of tweaks here and there with him. And I watched, if you watched that game Sunday night, he was really lights out through 5, and then his control just went all over the place. I mean, he came back in, basically walked on 4 pitches, and his control just went. So, like I said, I don't know how durable he is, and that's the problem with many of these teams now, right? I mean, you really are looking to try and get good quality starters that are inning eaters, and you just don't have a lot of them floating around anymore.
Well, they still owe him $80 million over the next 3 years as well. So I don't even know, on a trade basis, in season, out of season, Mr. Angelos just wouldn't want a $28 million pitcher. They're just franchises that don't think like that. And, hence you get the Wade Mileys here at the trading deadline. Maury Brown, he is Bizball Maury out on Twitter, and a rock and roller and an AC/DC cover band, but we'll get to that momentarily. I want to talk to you about merchandising in baseball because you did a piece with the Yankees and the Mets, and I guess it is fascinating to me. Maria, I'll mix a little rock and roll in with this. I went to see Billy Joel on Saturday night at Nats Park in D.C. I don't make it a practice of going to have anything to do with the Nationals, especially after my tour last year. But I did go down there, and I guess more than anything, you see all of this Nationals gear 40 minutes south of town, where 10 years ago, 12 years ago, that stuff didn't exist. But more than that, you wonder who's selling what. And the Orioles have had this renaissance. Obviously, the Nationals also a first-place team. We're in the corridor here where we could be talking about a Beltway or World Series and all that, the way they had New York 15 years ago. But from a merchandising standpoint, it really does say a lot as to who's the hotter team, who's the more desirable swag to wear at this point, right?
Well, I mean, I would look at it. I think if you got down into players and whatnot, you're really going to start to look at like Harper. He continues to be a very marketable guy out of, not very many players in baseball that are really being marketed, So, from an individual player's perspective, I would look at that. I'm sure Scherzer probably moves quite a bit, and maybe Worth. But really, in terms of Baltimore, Manny Machado right now is freaking unbelievable. And I just get back to this thing. I really, there seems to be, there's Brooks Robinson, and then there's, everybody else. But in terms of Baltimore, I'm really looking at Manny Machado as one of the most exciting third basemen that I can remember in a very long time. And now I'm not privy to the numbers. The numbers that I was looking at were for the Mets and the Yankees, of all things, in New York. But it would be an interesting study if the numbers were made available on how sales have been. I'm sure that Mr. Angelos would probably hate to look at it because at one point he controlled the whole area. But I think that he's
been well compensated, by the way, as we've pointed out, for that, right?
Of course he is. Yeah, he's been well compensated. There's little doubting that, which also gets back to the why we're having a problem with the carriage dispute that just never seems to end. But it would be an interesting study to look at, and I think that both clubs are in fantastic spots right now. And Baltimore had kind of a both clubs kind of went through some down cycles. I think that, some of it, of course, a lot of people are going to say there was the managerial problems that we saw in Washington that may have something to do with the change that's going on right now.
Has been a quick change, I'll tell you that. Dusty Baker,
it was a very quick change.
He's been a great manager of the year between him and Madden, and what's going on in Texas, Cleveland. I mean, there have been some real reclamation projects here this year.
There have been, and this is an interesting thing, I think, to watch in baseball in general. It's very difficult to pinpoint when a team is going to do well and when they don't. And you struggle. I mean, injuries are always the easiest thing to point at. But there really are some teams where you just can't quite figure them out. And the Giants are the best example of this. They're in first place one year, and they're going to win the World Series, and then they're last place, and then they win the World Series, and then they're last place, and they do these weird undulations. And then there are some that are more easily seen where their things are moving and they've caught in fire, and that's, you saw the Royals in 2014, and then last year, and they're obviously down this year. And then you look at really how the Cubs are doing. But the Baltimore was another one. I mean, it really looked like, and then, in the Nationals last year at the beginning of the season, everybody, I thought, had pretty much picked the Nationals to win the NL East, and it was nothing. I mean, it was a huge disappointment. It was a very bad.
Well, they're kind of a year late in blooming this year, right?
Well, they are in that. I mean, I would say that there's that, but I think that there was an awful lot of acrimony that went on in that clubhouse, and I just think that Matt Williams couldn't get quite the control of it. And look, it just really fell apart at the end, where you've got your closer and your star player going at it in the dugout, and your manager's not even aware of it going on. I mean, that was bad. But I do think, your Beltway conversation, at some point it's going to happen. I don't know if it's going to be this year or not, but both teams are in a position to do something. And really, I think Baltimore looks really good right now. I mean, the Red Sox have kind of fallen off where they were really looking like a powerhouse there for a while. And, by the way, the Red Sox, I'm sure, will try and do something at the trade deadline. So whether Wade Miley is the decision maker and the difference maker between what the Red Sox do that's really going to be, I guess, a question of the hours to see what happens there.
Well, we talk about the trading deadline and the Yankees and selling off Andrew Miller and selling off Chapman as they did in the past week. And you say, what does it do to a brand? You did a little study on Yankees and Mets merchandise as well. And clearly the Mets, the toast of the town, having gone to the World Series last year. But the Yankees, this enormous, giant brand, but maybe not so much this year, right?
Well, no, it's not. I mean, it's interesting. So the data was provided by Mitchell and Ness, which is a merchandising firm. And
I have
they
a few
basically
pieces of their clothing in my closet, yes.
Yeah, so they went out and basically said, okay, we're going to look at how much we ship and how much gets moved. And it was really surprising. I mean, they broke down New York. Now, they couldn't get Long Island in the map, but then they provided the data on that. And it's really interesting. When you throw in Long Island, the Mets are ahead of the Yankees in merchandise sale by like 1/10 of a percentage point. I mean, it's so close right now across the boroughs that it's really a surprising thing to look at, because I think that we are in that position to where there has been, all the World Series and basically the storied brand and how long, George Steinbrenner had basically moved the Yankees into relevancy after being non-relevant. Of course, people forget the reason they were relevant was because Steinbrenner basically got suspended, and then Richard was able to go out as a general manager and make the core group that basically built all those dynasty years. So it's kind of an interesting time to look at them. I mean, I think Cashman has finally gotten the Steinbrenners to buy off on this idea of like, we are no longer in a position to be buying talent and having that be enough, because it was really built around player development. And that's just so critical right now. And that, in terms of where the Yankees are at, I think that they're going to become very much I won't say pedestrian, but I'll say that they will be a team that will be more in line with where everybody else has gone. They're late to the dance in this thing. And so I think that it's really interesting that the Mets, who, of course, if you think about them a few years ago with the Bernie Madoff scandal and everything else, everybody was screaming that they were a shame. They were horrible. They were an embarrassment to Major League Baseball. There were campaigns to get, basically to have the team sold, the Wilpons to basically.
Well, there was a thought that they were tanking it because they didn't have the money to compete, right?
Well, I don't know if there was that. I mean, the thing that people forget about all that stuff, their attendance started to tank before the Madoff thing came around. And so, it was really one of those things. I mean, people forget when they came out of Shea, which was cavernous, right? They were selling it out in a huge deal. And the idea was, well, if we go to Citi Field, we'll lower the seating capacity and we'll be able to offer, we'll sell it at a premium. That's how we'll do it. And it went horribly wrong. It just went all bad. And it was really interesting. And, I remember there was an awful lot of talk about the Mets being sold. And I never bought into that. I mean, I think that there was pressure, from the public's perspective. I never thought that there was going to be much around it from baseball, largely because, well, I mean, Selig and the Wilpons were very tight. But they've really kind of turned it around. Now, I don't know. I don't think that this year will be last year. I think that the rotation obviously has some strains in it right now due to injury. And, of course, the offensive pieces that were there that came around at the trade deadline last year have not been as strong. So, I mean, it's just an interesting time right now to look at how these brands are crossing. I don't think the Mets, they're always going to be, the
second
stepchild
yeah,
of the
right.
two, and they'll always be that.
Maury Brown joining us here from Portland, Oregon. He covers all things Major League Baseball as well as the business of sports at Forbes as well as at Bizball. And you can follow his journey out on Twitter at Bizball, Maury. That's Bizball. And it's our acquaintance came from stadiums and TV revenue and baseball and the business of baseball. But certainly social media keeps us closer, Maury. And I know you're out on Twitter. I'm on Twitter. Everyone's on Twitter. And pretty soon there are going to be a lot of live sporting events on Twitter, much like we've seen on Yahoo and YouTube and other places. It is an expanding media vehicle, correct?
It is, and this is going to be interesting to watch right now. I think that Twitter is making forays into more live content, and it'll be interesting to see. I don't know about you, Nestor, but when I watch any sporting event, I will have either my computer or my phone open to Twitter.
Well, of course you do, right? I mean, it's a companion, right? Sure.
It is a companion. It is the second screen for all sporting events. It's amazing the amount of information that can be got, and the dialogue and the humor. I find it just humorous, if nothing else. But it does create this sense of community, like a bunch of people are sitting in the bar watching a game. And I think it'll be interesting to see how Major League Advanced Media, they purchased the rights to the NHL last year, which was a significant thing. You never had a league buy the digital rights or even any of the video rights for another league, but they did. And so now they're going to have one game a week starting in, they said, the fall. They wouldn't quite pin it down. They're looking at around the fall, but it could be sooner. Well, there'll be some baseball games once a week on Twitter. And then when the hockey season fires up, that's where you're going to get the most of it. They're going to do the entire 2016-17 NHL season on Twitter. And I think it'll be interesting to see watching the game and having a pane open and being able to just dialogue about that. And that's where, I don't know if it'll be that great. It'll be great to have dialogue around that event. And certainly event-driven stuff like the Super Bowl or the World Series or the NBA Finals or the Stanley Cup, then it becomes much easier to drive people to just that. When I'm watching baseball, I'm watching everything, and it's probably you are. I mean, you're going to start with the Orioles, but you're watching the pennant races. You're seeing what else is going on in the AL East. You're really trying to pay attention to what's going on in the wild card races, everything. You won't be able to do that when you're watching a specific game. There'll be a hashtag, and the conversation will be just around that. And so I think it will be interesting to see. They've got a deal for Thursday Night Football that'll be happening. There's some live NBA programming that, albeit aren't for games, that they're going to do. So they just did like this E-League thing that's just happening now that's turned into a pretty big deal for gamers. So they continue to do that. And then the other thing that they did was they did the Democratic and Republican conventions live. So it's an interesting time, I think, to see how this is going to do. They really want to try and do something with this and provide something different than what Facebook does. Facebook allows for live filming. You and I can stream something live. We're at a concert. We want to show it. You can do that sort of thing. But you don't see sports leagues giving you live content, major content like that. So I think it'll be really interesting to see.
Well, it is an evolving world, an evolving medium. I remember 15 years ago, it was just people didn't even know what I looked like. Now I can broadcast live in HD, putting my radio on video, and the rest of the world has gone that direction as well. We love following you, dude. I hope all is well this summer. I don't know what you have on your rock and roll menu, but I just saw Billy Joel. I've seen Paul McCartney, and I'm waiting for Springsteen to come back, which clearly means I'm a geezer. I mean, I saw Chris Robinson last week in Annapolis with the Brotherhood, that the band that he's in. His brother, of course, played there 5 days later. So I've had a little rock and roll summer. I saw Huey Lewis in the news last week too, Maury.
Well, that's a good one. I mean, the big one up here, which is a big deal, was Temple of the Dog doing a reunion tour, and it sold out instantaneously.
Well, they're playing theaters, man. They're playing like 5 shows. It's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy. I mean, it's ridiculous. You should see the price. Some of the asking prices on the secondary market are ridiculous. I mean, thousands of dollars for tickets. I would love to see it. I was just like, yeah, man. No,
I'm going to watch it on Periscope.
Yeah, we'll watch it on Periscope or we'll watch it on Twitter. But yeah, no, I'm for me, this is like the gravy time. I'm doing festivals all summer long. I'll be playing Thursday. I play next Friday, and then I got a couple of summer dates, and then I'm slows down and goes back indoors. But now it's been a lot of fun. The weather's been good. I'm sitting in beautiful weather right now, so I'll take it any time, man.
A little AC/DC, a little shoot the thrill, a little cold beer. What more can the man ask for in the Pacific Northwest, right?
That's right, man. That's exactly right.
Hey, we'll be checking you out. Maury, always a pleasure to have you on, and I'm sure when Mr. Angelos and Mr. Lerner get together and fight some more over the mass and money, we'll talk again soon.
Well, we'll cook up some popcorn and we'll do that. All right, Nestor?
Yeah, I don't have a bowl big enough for that, Maury.
All right, man. You take care.
Be well. There he goes, Maury Brown, Biz Ball Maury, out on Twitter and at Forbes and doing the business of sports, and a lot of baseball in there as well. Of course, trading deadline, the Orioles pick up Wade Miley. We will be talking about that, I'm sure, a lot over the next 8 weeks. And the Ravens on the backfield out in Owings Mills. Luke on that on a daily basis. A couple of Baltimore practices this week as well. We've been talking a ton of football. You can find me, Nasty, at WNST.net, anywhere the internet is served. Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, as well as in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world. Just download the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear. Reminder, next Tuesday, head coach Brian Billick, our partner on behalf of the Living Classrooms Foundation, joining us at Greenmount Station in Hampstead. We'll have some crab cakes, some cocktails, some football conversation. Come on out. Say hello to the coach. Head coach Brian Billick joining us at Greenmount Station in Hampstead on Tuesday the 9th. And we will be swabbing for the Bone Marrow Registry and for There Goes My Hero as well. This is WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.